So we're about to start another lesson, and it'll be another lesson on the eyes. But before we go into that, I thought it might be useful for me just to point out a few things. Are there any musicians in the room? Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Do you read music? Yep. Yep. Musician? Yep. Yep. So you can read musical scores? Yeah. So this is in response to a few conversations I had yesterday with people about instructions and how sometimes instructions can be a little bit, I won't say confusing, but not all-inclusive. And it's got something to do with language and trying to describe movement. And the reason why I asked if there are any musicians in the room, because those of you who have ever read a musical score of an orchestral piece, they run into the same problem. How do you describe what instrument plays at one time when there's many different instruments playing at the same time? And the score, for anybody who can read music, is right there. For those of you who play piano, how do you describe what the right hand is doing while the left hand is doing? And those of you who know how to read music and can do that, it's just a piece of cake, right? So there's something about that kind of description of music. Well, anyway, for me it's not. Yeah? There's something about that kind of description that tells you everything synchronously, all at the same time. But language isn't like that. Because to describe a movement to you in language, I have to describe one thing after another in serial form. And to make a complete sentence would be very long, but not only that, to try to give you a complete description in time is impossible. I can't do it. So yesterday, when I was just talking about the right eye and I forgot about talking the left, that's kind of like a device that you use to simplify. Right? Because if I said, well, now, as your right eye goes to the right, think of the right-hand corner. As your left eye goes to the left, think of the left-hand corner. Think of both of the eyes at the same time. Can you see it gets really verbose? So rather than that, you do one description, and for most of you, some of you might have this particular skill, for most of you, the left eye will just follow. So that's a little bit of clarification. So we don't always articulate everything that's going on, because to do so in language will give you a false sense of what happens at what time and when. Philippa, are you familiar with movement script, Laban and stuff like that? Benish, me too, yeah. So probably both trained in Benish. So there's movement scripts as well, where you, just like a musical score, you can look on the script and you can see how things unfold with several dancers all at the same time. And I think historically speaking, Moshe was the catalyst for the creation of that Israeli system called Eshkol Watchman movement notation. And that happened in the dance academy over there in Tel Aviv. So there's music notation, there's movement notation, and then there's our everyday language that you and I will be using to try to invite people into movement. So the simpler you can make it, the better. Yeah. So that maybe was a reason for some of your confusion yesterday. Is any questions around that? Oh, okay. So the second thing is this. You've been using your attention quite a lot in these lessons with myself, with Susan, and soon with Jenny. And you're learning how to use your attention. And usually in everyday life, we use it very pinpointedly. Yeah. That's what I focus on, and everything, the world kind of just disappears. This kind of thing. Well, in these lessons, you're being asked to go back and forth between, if you want to give a description to it, between exclusive attention, in other words, really focusing on one thing at a time, and then popping out into inclusive attention. How does that one detail sit in relationship to other many, many details? And that's quite a skill you're learning, popping back and forth between the two. Most of us learned that skill implicitly as children, but then through our education, it kind of got lost, because in education, they really want you to pay attention here, now. So in here, we're kind of trying to bring that back explicitly. Now, can you see how those two things relate together? If we're so used to thinking in language, and language is serial, how we can just go pip, 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 this. But what happens when you start to not think serially, but think systemically? Suddenly everything relates at one time together. That kind of takes you a little bit out of the usual way that we think in language. Aha. Yep. So for the recording, this is what a conductor does. I mean, their job is to see the score and then to relate to each musician. This is when you come in, this is how you play in relationship to that part, know a little bit more piano, know a little bit more forte, a little bit here. So you could say the conductor is the brain, and the orchestral parts are like every part of your body that's innervated by the brain. Your use of attention then becomes that. How can I be playing my part, in other words, moving the eye, while still having the rest of the orchestra in my attention, so that I'm not going faster than the rest of the orchestra, or slower than the rest of the orchestra, or playing louder than the rest of the orchestra, or softer than, but then I'm actually part of the ensemble, because that's what we are. We are ensembles. You know, we're an ensemble of how many billion parts? So those two things go together. In our culture, through our language, we learn to go one thing at a time. And in these lessons, you take on a very different point of view of trying to sense relationally how things go together. And over time, you get really, really skilled with that. If some of you might be very, very skilled with that through your various other practices, maybe music, dance, yeah, academia, yeah. So I'm not saying it's a skill exclusive to this method, but it's a capacity of human minds to be able to do that. So that's a half, is that a half up in the air arm? Okay.
All right.
Here it comes.
So we can only focus on one thing at a time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference, like, so you, because I was oiling a deck, right? An old banana shack. Hadn't been done like 14 years or something.
Yep.
I gurneyed it and then I sanded it all with my mates and it was looking beautiful. But then we started doing the oiling and we had music in the background. And then I was thinking about that. I was like I was with the music. I was totally with the music, but at the same time, I was totally with my brush stroke. And, you know, I felt like I was doing two things at a time, or more so like the music was kind of like painted in on the picture, or the brush stroke was like kind of painted in on the picture, or like how you're saying, like systemically, like you're focusing on one thing,
right,
but really you're just kind of there and everything's happening. Like you're not really...
You can.
Yeah.
But that's a very particular use of attention. So at the moment, while you were talking, I was looking at you, but I had my visual awareness spread.
Mm.
So I'm kind of hearing you, but I'm also aware of movement over here and clicking over there, rather than just really just going nothing but you.
So is it true that like, because we're seeing and we're like hearing and like feeling and stuff, like there's so many different like conscious gatherings happening like right now, but is it, we can still, that thing about focusing on like one thing isn't as, I guess like you're saying, it doesn't have to be as like dry and analytical as it.
No, it doesn't have to be dry and analytical. Matter of fact, what you're practicing is a very fleshed out kind of somatic, what it feels like to shift your attention, what it feels like to narrow down your attention, because that has a feeling to it. You know, broad attention, narrow attention, and these are the kinds of things we'll get more and more and more into as the training goes on. Yeah? But to answer your question more specifically, very, very directly, we do shift our attention very, very rapidly from this to that, to that, to that, to that, to that, to this. And the illusion that appears is that we have a unitary awareness, but it's actually constructed. Yeah. So that's another thing that we'll also get into.
Yeah. That's like, it's, that to me is like a schizophrenic mind. Like always going bang, bang, like over there, over there, over there.
Yeah. Yeah. So these are the kinds of things that occupied the fellow who developed this. But this is the thing to remember. No matter how intellectual the question he asked, his answer, he always tried to steer back to what's the embodied understanding of this? How do you do this? Or what's the experience of that? So that's what we're coming back to in this method all the time.
Nice.
Yeah. So it was good to know that you knew where the front of the room was. That was good. But you didn't walk back up that way, because I always said, can you come to the front of the room? And you all thought I was at the front. It's good. Now, isn't that interesting how that was established already as a norm in this room within a day? Yeah, because Susan's been sitting up here. Then when I taught, I sat up here. And then I was sitting here and I said, come up to the front of the room, and you knew where to go. Nice. I didn't say. Yeah, but gee, you told them. Okay, good. Yeah. Sure. So I'm saying that now not to be tricky or smart, but that in this lesson, I will be asking you to lie pretty much in this orientation in the room so that you know that this is front. Because in this particular lesson to do with the eyes, I'll be asking you to lift your head to look ahead of you. Ahead of you is the front, will be the front of the room. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if we're all on the same page, then at least that is the beginning, and it allays a little bit of potential confusion. So know that this is the front of the room. And could you please go back to your mats? And when you arrive at your mat, could you please remain standing? I think you should just gauge how you go. Yeah, really just be really in with yourself and just check.